Okay, recording started. Today's topic is a continuation of strengthening and weakening questions from last time. We've just finished going over the rules, and now we're going to take a look at some problems. So here's a problem about this. Maybe a timer. Okay, go for it. Okay, sorry, it looks like your polling answers are still they're not A through E yet, so let's fix that. Where is your A through E? There you go. Okay, remember the GMAT's not a test where you can not pick an answer. So if you don't have an answer yet, please pick one. The multiple choice options are there now, so apologies for any mishap with half of the choices. Take about 10 or 15 seconds and go ahead and pick an answer. Okay, so let's take a look. Remember with these problems of critical reasoning, what you want to do, we've discussed this in several of our sessions before, so just a quick recap as far as the way this whole thing works and what this entire part of the test is all about. Basically, critical reasoning is your normal everyday reasoning that you use in the real world. It's not any sort of crazy logic stuff or mathematical thinking or anything that you could memorize or use rules for. It's basically just normal reasoning. So just remember, for every critical reasoning problem, what you want to do is approach it that way. And if you can think about the passage in a way that helps you do that, that's what helps you win this game. So you want to get critical reasoning back into the real world. Back into meaning you want to get it out of classroom planet where people think in very weird ways. You want to get it back into the real world. That's real is not spelled correctly there. So, and that means two things when you read the passage. The first is try to personalize it if you can. Because it's always easier for everyone to think about stuff if they are involved in the situation. Like if you are in the situation in some way, it'll be just easier to think about it than if you're not. So two ways to do that. The first is, if possible, try to put yourself literally into the situation. And if that's not possible, like in this case you can, because this is a passage about a business. So you can actually imagine that XYZ is your company, and that you're trying to decide whether you want to implement this plan for your company. And it'll become easier to think about it if you make it yours like that. If that's not possible, then what you can do is you can imagine that you're just having a conversation about the topic at hand. Because when you do that, what will happen is you'll just have a much better insight about why all the statements are there. I mean, the difference between reading weird academic passages and having conversations is that when you have a conversation, it's always extremely obvious why every statement is there. Like if someone says something to you in a conversational context, it will always be clear to you why that person is saying what they are saying. As opposed to a random bunch of statements on a white screen, they may not be as clear. So try to personalize, and then when you do that, if you make it a conversation, this will basically automatically happen. Make sure you can simplify the passage too. The best way to think about simplifying is imagine that you have to explain the content of the passage to a 10 or 11-year-old. Because all of these passages should have content that theoretically can be explained to someone of approximately that age. In other words, that's the age when people understand just about everything concrete, although they don't really understand abstractions yet. And these passages will pretty much be dealing with concrete things. So let's do this. Can anybody explain the content of this passage to a theoretical 10 or 11-year-old? Can anybody do that in the chat box? How would you do that here? Like, what does this passage basically say? You know, if you can capture the essence of it in as few words as possible, that'll be better. Can anybody do that? Okay, yeah, and if you look at that, that's pretty good. Improve efficiency and reduce expenses. The only thing I would leave out of that, if I were talking to an actual 10-year-old, would be the part about efficiency. Because efficiency is kind of a hand-waving abstraction that a literal 10-year-old might not really understand. So, but otherwise, it's pretty good, right? So basically the deal is, if we want to explain this to someone who is 10 or now I don't really understand what that means. So, okay, so what you want to do is you basically want to implement this plan. Like, you think a work from home plan will be good for your company. I mean, if you're explaining it to someone who's 10 or 11 years old, you don't need to go into things like unit costs and efficiency and things like that. You don't really need to go there. It's really just you think a work from home plan might be a good thing. And so you ask volunteers to try the plan. And then they had excellent results. Things went really well for them. And so, therefore, you want to make everyone. You're thinking about making everyone work at home. All your employees. Okay. Or at least, maybe not everybody. This doesn't necessarily imply all employees, but at least it implies a pretty decent chunk of them, right? So instead of you're making more people do the same thing. Now, when you think about this, if you make this your company, like you're thinking about this as the should I do this with my employees. There's a word in here that's probably going to strike you as significant, which is if you think about the way that samples like this are supposed to be done, you probably don't think about taking a bunch of volunteers and looking at their results. Like, what's the problem with looking at the results of volunteers? Anybody tell me? Does anybody want to volunteer? Ha, in the chat box. Like, where's the issue there? Yeah, it's not Peter et al. It's not representative. Peter, it's not really an issue of the sample size. It's not an issue of how many people. But when you see this, and if you're imagining that these are your results, it'll be easier for you to think about this. But the point is that these are the people who want to do the work at home. So they probably don't represent everybody. And I mean, the thing about personalizing this passage is that it's so much easier to realize this. The more you involve yourself in the situation, the easier it will be for you to realize why this is a special group of people. Like, just imagine that you are actually the one running the company and you have a bunch of people. Like, if you can picture these people in your head, it'll be even better. If you can picture these people, think about who would want to do this. Hey, does anybody want to work at home? And you see some hands shoot up, right? You'll probably, if you're thinking about this as a real world situation, you'll probably get a really good sense of who those people are. You'll think of the person who has 3 kids and won't have to put them in daycare anymore, or the person who doesn't want to deal with traffic in and out and would rather have different hours of work from home. Or the point is that you're going to imagine a whole bunch of people who really, really want to do it, and so whose results are probably going to be much better. Yeah, or I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Phillips Kamatu. Yeah, or just people who would rather work alone, even if there's no real good reason other than they would rather do it. So, and if you imagine these people in front of you in an office full of other employees, it would be much more obvious to you these are special people. So what you should think is you should think that these are special people. Like these, you shouldn't expect other employees to have the same results. Yeah, they want to work at night. I mean, like me. I don't know if you guys know, but right, I sleep during the day and work at night. So if we look at this, basically so what you're looking for here, if you have a goal in this sense, you want to look for evidence that the volunteers are different from other employees in the sense of productivity. Either absolutely or at home, because there's going to be two ways that this won't work. The first will be if they will do better at home, if they just are the kind of people who do less work in an office. The second is that if there are people who are just absolutely more productive, and so if you just take them out, then you get a distorted statistical sample. So if we look at A, that's what we want, right? A says that the people who wanted to do the work from home are basically the people who work best that way. So they're different from everybody else. Like you would expect, if this is true, you would expect these guys to have better results than average from working at home. And so if you implement the plan for everybody else, then what you would expect is that the rest of the employees would not have the same sort of fantastic result. So that's choice A. If you have any questions about why choice A is correct, go ahead and put them in the chat box. If not, a quick glance at the other choices. So here's the question on a new page. Also, don't forget what you need to do is you need to be very specific about what the question is. So don't forget to translate the question into specifics. The more specific, the better, as long as you don't mistranslate the question. Because notice what you want to do is two things. You need to have something that argues against deciding to implement the plan. And it has to be against deciding on the basis of the data that we're looking at. So in other words, we need a reason why those particular results don't mean that we should do this for everybody. So if we translate the orange and the purple, why don't these results extend to everyone? That's the deal. So just keep this in mind. Because remember, when you do things in the real world, that you always translate questions. I mean, even the most general sounding questions in the world, everybody will always translate before answering. For example, if someone asks you, hey, why are you acting like that? Or explain yourself. If someone says explain yourself, that doesn't mean tell me anything about yourself and explain it. That's not what that means. That means you are doing one very strange thing right now, and whatever that is, and I really want to know why. That's what explain yourself means. So whatever it is in the situation at hand, like explain yourself might mean why are you not excited about going on a trip? Or it might mean why are you not looking at my eyes when you talk to me, or something like that. But the point is that nobody will leave questions in general terms. It's only something that people will do on weird GMAT things. So translate it into specifics. So in terms of B says that you would save enough money to justify a work-at-home plan, even if productivity were the same. So there are two major issues here. The first major issue with this is that it goes the wrong way. Like you're trying to argue against the plan, right? So you want to argue against the plan, but this is evidence for the plan. So that's bad. I mean, you don't want black if you're supposed to argue white. And also, it has nothing to do with the data. Because this is about office space, cost per square foot, that kind of thing, which has nothing to do with the data that are actually under discussion here. C is irrelevant because the size of the company is not really a thing. I mean, if you're thinking about increasing productivity, that's going to be per employee. It's not going to matter how big or small your force of employees is. Any questions about that? Actually, no one picked that choice anyway. Choice D says that these people were able to communicate with others. That seems to be, again, a wrong way to answer because it means the communication is not disrupted. I mean, if you wanted to explain choice D to a 10-year-old, if you wanted to simplify that, basically that means even if they work at home, employees can still talk to whomever they need to. So this is not against the plan. That's the point. I mean, this would actually be more reason to believe that the plan is good. Because it means communication is not disrupted. And again, it has nothing to do with the data at hand either. The data are specifically about the people who did the trial plan. So also nothing to do with the data. And finally, choice E, recent changes in the way work is organized. That has nothing to do with work at home. This is other changes. So any questions about this problem, please go ahead and post them in the box. If not, let me give you a choice F and see what you think about it. Let's say this choice were there. Say that I took choice B and changed it in this sort of way. So let's say there were a choice F that said, even if employees were to work at home, there would be no savings in terms of office space expenditure. So basically it's going to say the opposite of what choice B says. Okay, so in your multiple choice answers, if you think this would be a correct answer, then go ahead and put A. If you think it would not be, then put B. What do you think? Okay, we got a bunch of A's and a bunch of B's. Go ahead and pick something. Okay, so let's take a look. Again, A's and B's, same sort of thing. Use multiple choice answers in the box, not the text box, please. So, well, if you want to think about the question is not, notice what the question is not. The question is not just what would argue against implementing the plan, question mark. That's not what it says. I mean, it's not just the purple part. It's the purple part and it's the orange part. This is very, very important. You have to understand what the question says. So if the question were just the purple words, which would argue against deciding to implement the plan, then this would be a correct answer, because this is a factor that weighs against the plan. However, it does not have anything to do with the data of this survey. So this would not be a correct answer. It's got to be the purple and the orange. It's not just a reason to decide against the plan. It's a reason to decide. It's a reason not to decide in favor of the plan according to the data in this passage. That's the thing. So You really got to read the question very carefully. It's kind of like if I said, okay, I'm thinking about moving to Texas. You know, if the question is which of the following is a reason to decide against moving to Texas. If the question is something like, you know, Texas doesn't have the kind of nightlife that I like, then that works. On the other hand, if the question is which of the following is a reason not to move to Texas for work or for raising a family, then nightlife will become irrelevant because it doesn't have to do with those things. You know that if you were talking about it, you would realize that those would affect the issue or not affect the issue accordingly. But you have to translate the question and make sure that you read the question accordingly. Okay, questions in the box. Choice E, Harish says, would it have been a viable choice if it had said about work distribution? I don't really think so, because work distribution doesn't have to mean stay at home versus not. I mean, work distribution can mean lots of things. It could just mean to whom do you delegate different tasks or things like that. Like if I saw work distribution, I wouldn't think it had anything to do with working from home. I would think that just meant who gets to do what. You know, or which days of the week do you do certain things, or who has to handle what tasks. So that still wouldn't necessarily have anything to do with the orange. The past, it is a radical plan, meaning that XYZ is not used to doing it, but that's not really a factor. SWOT, as far as that goes, a lot of the time, not necessarily. A lot of the time you can strengthen or weaken things with reasons that have very little to do with what's in the passage. For example, if you have a plan that looks really good and, you know, like you could have a passage that's like, you know, which of the following argues against taking this job? And the passage talks about, you know, the job is fantastic and the pay is good and it's in a place with nice weather. Then the reason not to take the job has to do with raising kids. I mean, they could have that. Again, it all depends on the question. Like, if the question says, which of the following means these data are not good, then you have to stick to what's there. But if it's just what is a reason that weighs against this, then absolutely it can be something totally new and different. And in fact, a lot of the time it will. Are we still on the same question? Yes, we are. Okay. All right. So, well, savings, Gara, savings is a part of efficiency. Because, I mean, if you're thinking about what efficiency means in a work context, you're probably thinking about productivity per dollar spent, which is normally how businesses would measure efficiency. So if you did save money for the same amount of productivity, that would technically be an increase in efficiency. So, although remember that critical reasoning doesn't normally turn on mathematical definitions, I wouldn't stress over that too much. But yeah, if you save costs and still do the same work, then that absolutely is an increase in efficiency. Okay, that pretty much does it for the questions in the box. Let's take a look at another one. How about this one? Remember where to find answers to multiple choice questions. That would be right there. And this one's got a few more words than normal, so I'll give you a little bit more time than usual. So there you go. Have fun. Okay. Remember the GMAT test where you have to pick something. So please pick something that is a thing. And yeah, okay. All right, everybody pick something that is a thing. If your name is Avi or CJ, Eddie, Riti or Rick, Remember, this is not a test where you're allowed to not answer the question. So you got to answer the question. So please pick a choice in the next 10 seconds or so. Thanks. Okay, let's discuss. So again, the key here is to personalize in whatever way, involve yourself, or imagine that you're talking to someone about this. And then make sure you simplify, right? So who can tell me what's going on in this passage? Can anybody simplify this into terms that would make sense to someone who is 10 years old? Anybody do that in the chat box? Simplify into terms that a 10-year-old will understand. Chat box, you can do that. All right, a couple people are typing. Yeah, so they're asking people 40 to 60 to, it's not just a random song, like they're basically asking what song has like the biggest effect on your emotions, right? So they asked a bunch of people who are older, so whose teenage years. The point of these people being 40 to 60 years old is that their teenage years only represent a relatively small fraction of their lives, right? So they asked here, name a song. That's the significance. Like again, if you're talking about these results with someone, you'll reach these conclusions faster. The reason why it matters that the people are 40, 50, 60 years old is that their teenage years are only a small fraction of their lives. Like if they were 21, then it would not be very surprising if a bunch of them named songs from those ages, but they're 60, 50 years old. So name a song, name the song that with the biggest emotional effect on you ever. Yeah, and then if you look at 86%, remember that when you look at statistics, the actual number of the statistic isn't really ever going to matter. But the relative value, or like, how big is this approximately, what is this going to mean, that's going to matter. So the point is that almost everyone, that's the point of 86%, almost everyone named a song that was popular, that played on the radio or whatever, that got playing time, so to speak, when they doesn't go to everyone, but it's not sentence correction, when they were 13 to 17. So the point is it's a very, very small fraction of their lives. And so the question is, this is related to this. And so we're trying to figure out why. Now think about what they are saying, right? So what is the conclusion that the researchers made, or that whoever's writing this passage? Like they think that this is the conclusion that you're ultimately arguing against here. Like this is, somebody thinks this, the other guys think what? The point is that you're supposed to explain this correlation, right? So what's the hypothesis that other people made here, if you want to type in the chat box? Like this is the weird result we're interested in explaining. This orange correlation here. The other guys think, other reasons besides what? Like the other guys think it's the green thing. First, you got to figure out what you're arguing against. Though. Yeah, the other guys, the green guys who are making that argument upstairs, they think it's just that music naturally affects teenagers more than other people. Okay, so you're trying to figure out a reason that's not this. So what you want is a reason that would explain this correlation that has nothing to do with music having a stronger and natural effect. So you want a reason why so many people name songs from that narrow age band. That has nothing to do with a greater inherent power of music, with the idea that music is naturally more influential at that age. There's got to be something else. So there's got to be some other reason why people would name songs from such a narrow band of ages. So if you think about this says that people tend to retain and recall. Basically what this means to a 10-year-old is that when memories are emotional, people recall them better. So when memories have strong feelings associated with them, people remember them better. Like what is this? What does this have to do with the green guys? Like imagine that you were actually talking to the green guys about this. Like let's make this a conversation here. So let's move this stuff up a little bit. Let's move this so I can write down here. Okay, so let's say you're actually talking to the green guys about this. So they say, so here, let's just write their words in green and your words in not green. So you're actually talking about this conversation. Okay, they say, well, I think people mostly remember those songs. I think people mention those songs because they were more deeply affected by them. After all, teenagers are more deeply affected by these things in general. Okay, that's what the green guys say. And you say, actually, no, I think it's something else. I see what you mean, but no. Well, I see how you could think that, but no. To which the green guys would say, well, okay, what do you think it is? Okay. Then what do you think it is? And you say, well, blank. Okay, imagine inserting these responses into this conversation. Like, let's say you put choice A into here. What is the green guy going to say in response to this? How are they going to answer that? They're not going to say it's irrelevant. Here, let's take these words and actually put them into blank. I mean, if you're trying to actually argue that they are wrong, they're going to be like, aha, I told you so, right? Because they say, okay, I think it's because they're more deeply affected by this. And you say, well, when memories are associated with strong feelings, people do remember them better. The green guy is going to say, yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm telling you. They're going to say, that's my point. Aha, I told you so. Like, that's what the green guy is going to respond with here. Aha, I told you so. This is the conversation you're going to have with choice A. Choice A is going to be like, okay, green guy, I guess you're right. So that's not what we want, because we want a reason why the green guy is wrong. And choice A totally tends to show that the green guy is actually right. Like it's additional evidence in favor of what the green guy is saying. So yeah, same thing, Peter, because that's the argument that the green guy is making. The green guy says it was greater emotional affect. So that's the point here. And again, the power of imagining this as a conversation is just greater than anybody really thinks at first. It's a very big deal. If you can imagine this as an actual dialogue, you will win this game much more easily than if you don't. So, I mean, let's take a look at the other answers here. So this is the one we want. But just imagine these things inserted into this conversation the way we just did with choice A. So, Manoj, yeah, but see, what you're doing when you say this is you're basically filling in a hole in the green guy's argument. Like the green guys say, okay, teenagers are more deeply affected, so they're more likely to remember these songs. And you're actually filling in the one thing that is actually kind of a hole in the green guy's argument. Like, how do you get from more deeply affected to more likely to remember? And you're conveniently filling that gap in for them. And they would be like, aha, I get it. Like, thank you. You just completed my argument for me, sir. Or man. I mean, it's exactly what you did. Like, the one thing that is sort of a non-connection in their argument, you just filled in. Because they said, okay, teenagers are more affected, therefore they're going to remember. And you help them get from more affected to they are going to remember. You actually filled in the rest of their argument for them. Kind of nice of you, but that's not what you're trying to do here. So, okay, now let's look at other choices. And let's see how they fit in. If you put in choice B, okay, the green guy says, I think people remember songs because they're more deeply affected. Well, I don't think so. So what do you think it is? Well, I think it's just that they respond to life events more deeply, and they disassociate it with the song. So in other words, what's going on in choice B is green guy thinks that it's the song that affects the person, that music has an inherently greater effect. So that's too many words for the green guy. The green guy is saying, I think it's because music, I think this is a thing, because music's effect on teenagers is just greater. Well, I see you could think that, but no, okay. Because what you're saying here is it's not the music, it's the life event. Like, it's not the song itself, it's the fact that your first boyfriend dumped you, or that, whatever happens when you're 14 that is very traumatic or whatnot. So, you're breaking the connection there. Choice B says that it's not actually the music, that it's the things that happen to you in your life. So that would help defeat the green guy conclusion. Try other choices here. Choice C, which is right there, says that teenagers just spend a lot more time listening to music, which that makes total sense too, right? They think people are more likely to remember these songs because the music's effect is greater. Well, I see how you could think that, but no. Okay, what do you think it is? I think it's just that they spend a lot more time exposed to music at that age. So because they hear so many more songs when they are teenagers, they're just more likely to remember those songs. And that would totally be a good reason. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about. If you've been following here, remember you want the reason that doesn't defeat the green guy, which would be A. So, but we'll talk about the rest of the choices here. All right, if you put in choice D, I see a bunch of dots. You guys can't hear me? Okay, you can hear. That's good. All right. Excellent. So choice D, again, imagine this in a conversation here. Well, the green guy says, okay, I think it's the fact that music has a greater effect. Well, I see how you could think that, but no. Okay, what do you think it is? Well, if you think about it, the survey had already made them think about being teenagers. This would also be a reason why, because then the point is that the survey questions made them think already about that period of their lives. So they're probably thinking about these songs just because they're thinking about them. Like if I ask you like 8 questions about high school, and then I ask you about music, you're probably going to think about music from high school. That's basically the point they're making here. So, and this would definitely be a reason why the green guys are wrong, that the survey was biased in this sort of way. And then lastly, choice E. In most of those cases, they named songs that had retained popularity for 20 or more years. So I think it was because music effect was greater. Well, I think no. Okay. Well, those were just songs that had stayed popular forever. In other words, if you're talking to a 10-year-old, like, well, those songs may have been around when the people were teenagers, but they were also around for much more of that time of their lives. So in other words, I mean, those songs may have been popular when they were 13 to 17, but they all, I mean, what this choice says is that most of them are going to be songs that were popular when they were like 10 to 30 or 10 to 40, or like, in other words, most of their lives. Because these people are 40 to 60 years old, so 20 plus years of popularity is going to be most of the years these people can actually remember. So nailing it down to when they were 13 to 17 is going to be sort of unfair here. Because if this choice is a thing, then popular when they were 13 to 17 is not that meaningful anymore. Because they would also have been popular for a much larger swath of time. Zach, if you're following here, you want to, you're going to have 4 choices that prove the green guy's wrong, or at least that prove is too strong of a word. That basically show you that the green guys are probably wrong. And the only one that doesn't is A. A actually supports the argument that the green guys are making. So A is the correct answer to this problem because it doesn't do what you want it to do. Okay. Any questions about this? Again, as usual, notice the power of making it a conversation and of simplifying the choice. Choice B, really quickly, is the green guys think that it's because music naturally affects people more because it's music. If it's choice B, then it's not music naturally affecting people more. It's what's happening in their lives affecting them more. And then the music just happens to be associated with those things. Right. So like, in other words, they're saying you hear a song, the song is music, so it affects you automatically because it is music. That's what they're saying. But this is your life events affect you. And then the music is randomly associated with those events. A could be music, it could be memories directly of music. I mean, it doesn't have to be memories of life events. You know, like what the memories they're talking about in A, as applied to what we're talking about here, could be memories of those songs. But they don't have, this doesn't have to mean life events. So, hopefully that helps. memories are memories. They can be memories of anything. They can be music, they can be life events, they can be smells, they can be sounds, sights, anything. So, all right. Hopefully that helps. Other questions, feel free. Now we'll look at another one. Let's take a look at one. How about this? Timer. Okay. Go ahead and pick something that is a thing. There's still a few of you who don't have answers yet. So remember where the multiple choice answers are found. Those are here. So please pick something. Okay, there's still about 8 or 9 of you who don't have an answer yet. Okay, let's take a look. There's a few of you who haven't answered the question yet, but, we shouldn't wait too much longer. By the way, just real quick, there's a question that I missed in the box from before, so let me just get that, and then we'll talk about Aram Bill here in a second. The question is this. The deal is that I don't know the answer to that question per se, but you don't really want to think about these. Like thinking about these as a separate type of question is not a good way to do things. For example, here's the question that we were asking this about. So if you don't like thinking of this as filling in the blank, you're going to start, you'll see the passage on your board here in a second. It's the thing about the music having a greater effect on people's lives or not. If you don't like this being a blank, then you can just change the question in your head into a corresponding question that's not fill in the blank. So it is tempting to conclude from this result that this is true. So you can just, if you don't like that, you can just say, okay, therefore, we can conclude from this passage, so we can conclude from this result that music has a greater effect on teenagers than on people from other ages. Then what you're doing is you just say, which of the following would weaken the argument? And then the only difference with having an accept question is an accept question is not a different kind of question. You're just, if it's an accept question, then just think of it as 4 right answers, 1 wrong answer, and you just want to pick the wrong answer. That's the point. So, none of this is really any different. As far as fill in the blank questions go, they're not all strengthening or weakening. You can actually make a fill in the blank for any type of task. Because, all of these things can be part of conversations. So, okay, you can't see it. You should be able to see it now. All of these tasks that they ask you to do can be parts of conversation, right? You can strengthen, weaken, you can find assumptions in conversations, you can do anything. So, filling in a blank is just like putting it into a conversation. So, you shouldn't think of this, Peter or others, you shouldn't think of this as being an inherently different task. This is, the point of complete the argument is that you can make it, it's going to be equivalent to some other kind of task. And your job is to figure out exactly what that is. So when there's a blank, problems with blanks are just the same as other kinds of tasks. They just look different. So fill in the blank problems are just normal critical reasoning tasks, wearing new clothes. And then if it's an accept problem, you just want to think of it as pick the wrong answer instead of pick the right one. So, other than that, same kind of reasoning, right? So, except just pick the wrong answer instead of the right one. Okay. Maria, it looks like I don't see what the issue is. I'm not a tech person, so I can't really help. But it might be the fact that it looks like you're on some kind of mobile device, which might be the problem. So let's see. Rick, it depends on what the blank says, man. Because if it's, you can make an accept question for anything. I mean, if it's an accept question about assumptions or something, then it won't have anything to do with that. You just have to think about it. Just think about it like a normal. There's no sense in thinking about accept as a different kind of question. That's a silly way to think about it, because you're just increasing the amount of noise in your brain for no reason. Just think about it as a normal question, except you're just picking the answer that's wrong. You're picking the answer that doesn't do what you want. If it is a question about weakening, then yes, but just think about what each question is asking you, and then take it from there. So let's talk about Aramville. Okay, so among those young children with elevated levels of lead in their blood, blah, 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 what does this mean to a 10-year-old? Can anybody explain this? You're a 10-year-old. Simplify. Okay, so they have lots of lead in their blood. The point is, okay, let's do it like this. Like when you're talking to someone who's about that age, they do really well with like bullet points, number 1, number 2 kind of thing. I mean, how many possible reasons are there for the lead? Okay, like kids in this town have lead poisoning. How many possible reasons are there? There are 2 possible reasons. I mean, because again, the problem is that the biggest thing about being 10 years old is that you just cannot understand walls of text. So if you're translating this wall of text into another wall of text, then it's still problems, right? Reason number 1 is lead from paint in houses. And then reason number 2 is lead in gasoline that has leached into the soil. They don't sell lead gasoline anymore, but the point is that it's still in the ground. And so we want to say the evidence is that, like, we noticed that people living where the kids where have more lead poisoning. What do they notice here? Which group of kids in this passage has more lead poisoning than other kids? Yeah, there's more traffic, right? So kids near big roads have more lead poisoning. So we think it's number 2, not so much number 1. This is what we're trying to do. So you need, notice that this doesn't say you're restricted to the same data. So I want to say it was SWOT. In this case, any other fair reason why it's going to be the lead gasoline and not the lead paint is going to help you here. Because strengthening an argument absolutely does not mean you have to reuse the same fact. Like, imagine a court case. You know, if you, like, are trying to strengthen the argument that someone committed a murder, you know, like, let's say you're just looking at things like fingerprints and bullet holes and stuff like that. But then if you find a journal that person wrote where they're like, I really want to kill this person, that would absolutely strengthen the argument, even if we hadn't mentioned it yet. So this is anything. Anything is fair game, as long as it supports your side of the argument here. So we want any reason, we want any other reason to believe that it's number two. Like, not necessarily anything that's stated, not necessarily relevant to the evidence already given, to believe that it's number two rather than number one. Okay, well, let's talk about this. So choice A, sales of lead-based paint was banned in 1977. That doesn't tell us much, unless we knew that all the houses in the town were newer than this. So the point is that choice A doesn't help, unless we know two things. It doesn't help without two additional things, which are, number one, like how much of the housing stock is older than 1977. And number two, like, is it the paint? Like, what's the interaction of the paint? I mean, what about tearing down houses older than that to build newer ones? You know, even if you build a newer house, maybe the tearing down the old one's going to have some sort of bad effect. This is not a good choice. We just don't know what it's going to do. We don't know what kind of effect it'll have. Choice B, traffic is heavier than it was 20 years ago. The problem is that we're not comparing data to 20 years ago. Like, if the passage said that the effect on lead poisoning was greater than it was 20 years ago. Like, if the passage compared lead poisoning levels to those of 20 years ago, you'd have something here. But you don't. Because we don't know what the effect is, right? Like, if you could watch this effect go up with the additional traffic, then this would be incredibly strong evidence. Like, if you were like, okay, 20 years ago, like, half the kids had lived near traffic and half of them didn't. And now, like, 80% of them live near the increased traffic. And then you would have incredibly strong evidence there. But no, we don't know, because you can't use changes in the data unless you actually have changes in the result to correspond to them. So that's not really a thing. What does choice C do? So number two. Yeah, and there's also what Garth points out, that the gasoline is lead-free today anyway. So even if there's a bunch of traffic, it doesn't really affect the lead in the ground. Absolutely. Now think about what C does. What does choice C do? Remember, when we see lead in the ground, remember, like, we think that lead in the ground comes from cars, or at least came from, like, pre-1990 cars. But if we have this, it's actually less likely that it came from cars. So that weakens our perspective. Like, this works against us. Because basically it's evidence that rather than coming from cars, that this paint actually came from flaking off of old buildings. So that would work against us here. What about choice D? Well, choice D says that there's more lead poisoning when people go outside than when they go inside. So when kids go outside more, there is more lead poisoning. And conversely, when they're indoors more, there's less of it. Think about what this means. Because if you think about hypothesis number one is lead that is indoors. Hypothesis number two is lead that is outdoors. So this is actually very strong evidence. Like, just think about what effect these things would have. Like, lead paint in houses would become more significant with more time spent indoors, and less significant with more time spent outdoors because it's in houses. If you think about option number two here, though, this is actually going to be more significant with more time spent outdoors. Because that's lead that has gone into the ground outside. You know, it's from traffic that was outside that has leached into the ground that is outside. So the fact that kids are having more lead in their blood when they are outdoors is very strong evidence that because like you can simplify this even more by saying it's indoor lead versus outdoor lead, which is basically what this is. So if you have choice D, that's evidence that it's outdoor lead and not that it's indoor lead. It's good stuff. And then choice E, if you think about it, the evidence is that people who live near traffic, they're the ones who mostly have lead poisoning. So choice E doesn't really explain anything. Because the point is the data that we're trying to reconcile here is the fact that few people indoors have this poisoning. So this doesn't help us explain the data, which relatively few kids have the poisoning from indoors. So, all right, as far as difficulty levels, if you've attended more than a couple of these sessions, you know what my answer is going to be. But the answer is you don't care. Don't ever think about difficulty levels. There's no benefit to be gained from thinking about them. In fact, what I point out, usually people ask this, but I like to point out every time, is that the very fact that you have to ask this question is proof that you don't care. Just think about that in your head. Like, if you have to ask that, that means you don't ever have any idea what the difficulty levels are. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to ask. So since you don't have any idea what they are, that means it's irrelevant. It means you can't plan any sort of strategy around them, so it doesn't matter. Just remember what you need to do, and I mean, it's worse than that. Like, if you're thinking about difficulty levels, it'll have an adverse effect on your performance. Because if you are thinking about difficulty levels, that just means proportionally less brain power that you can spend on solving the problem. You know, I think I've given this analogy before, but I like it, so I'll give it again. Let's say that you are getting shot at for 5 minutes, and you have to dodge the bullets so that you don't die. Okay, just think about that for a second. I mean, imagine if you spend any brain power thinking about how difficult it was to dodge the last bullets. You're going to be more likely to die, because that's less brain power that you're going to spend dodging bullets. And this is the same thing. If you're even thinking about these things at all, it just means that you're going to have less brain power available to solve the problem. So not only is there no upside to thinking about it, there's actually a big downside. So just, yeah, don't think about it. Okay, and then yeah, Gaurav, it does point to lead paint as one of the reasons, but even so, it would be limited to the indoors. So like the difference between, it sounds like you're saying E is like C, but it's not really, because E wouldn't cause lead-based paint to be outside. So it's just sort of irrelevant, whereas C would actually cause lead paint to be outside where we thought it was gasoline. But no matter what, it definitely doesn't strengthen the argument, so you're good to go here. Okay, if we hustle, we can do one more. So let's try to do one more here. Let's see. About this one. Go for it. Last one. Okay. Try to pick a thing that is a thing. Remember the GMAT doesn't have the option of not picking something. So we should pick something. Okay, so when you look at these things, if you're thinking about strengthening an argument, in a lot of cases you're just going to be thinking about weakening it and then thinking about what you can do to patch up that hole. But what you can do with a lot of these things, you probably aren't going to be able to do this in real time when you're doing a problem. But what you will be able to do in a lot of instances when you review the problem, what you can try to do is make analogies to render the issue more obvious. So what you'll see on the bottom part of the screen is you'll see the same paragraph that's up there. What I'm going to show you is an example of how you can make an analogy that'll just make the issue much more clear. And if there's any passages like this where you don't really understand what the issue is, then try this. So like a study followed a group of teenagers who had never, let's make it something like this. Well, let's say who had never attempted suicide before previously, and tracked whether they actually attempted suicide. So, and tracked whether they attempted suicide during the period of the time under study. Tracked whether they actually attempted it. After 1 year, the incidence of depression among those who had actually tried to kill themselves was 4 times as great as it was among those who had not tried to kill themselves. So, forget the nicotine thing. So it is likely that, I mean, the power of this analogy is that it makes their conclusion ridiculous, right? Like, so it is likely that suicide contributes to depression. I mean, the point of this analogy is that it should be really, really obvious what the issue is here. Like, if you noticed that the people who had tried to kill themselves were much more depressed on average than the people who had not, you would probably not think that it was the suicide that was causing the depression, or at least the suicide attempt. What would you think it was? Like, what is this basically almost certain to mean rather than that? Like what is really going to be going on here? What is the problem with their conclusion? What should they be concluding instead? Yeah, like, I mean, okay, clearly it's the other way around. So what you need to do here, because that's the same thing that is an issue here. The issue here in this passage with the nicotine and stuff is that I mean, with suicide, of course, it's much more obvious, and that's why that analogy is a powerful tool. But the issue here is going to be the same thing. The issue is, how do we know it's not the other way around? So, how do we know that depression isn't making teenagers start smoking in the same way that it's making them try to commit suicide down there? So if you can rule that out, then you can strengthen the argument. So choice A takes that factor away because it looks at people who are depressed at the start of the study. So if you look at that as a factor, that means because what we don't know at the beginning here is whether they were already depressed, as opposed to the other way around. So, but if you look at people who were already depressed, then they were no more likely to be smokers. I mean, this choice would obviously be nonsense in the context of the suicide analogy. But what this does is this rules out that whole idea. Choice A gets rid of, it rules out the possibility that these were pre-existing depression, that these were teenagers who were already depressed. So there. So I mean, the point is that there's going to be limits to your analogies that you can make, because the answer choices might not. Because the thing is that because this passage is so obvious, this answer choice would not make a lot of sense there. But at least this passage would help you understand the weakness of that passage, even though it wouldn't necessarily help you understand the answer choice. So we want A because it rules out that possibility. It rules out the idea of backward causation, basically. Choice B, the study didn't distinguish these, but it doesn't have to because the result doesn't distinguish them either. So we're only talking about smoking versus not smoking, so it doesn't make any difference if a study distinguishes that. It's basically just 1 or 0, smoking or not. That's what they're talking about. C, there are not a lot of friends or relatives that would, if anything, that would strengthen the value of the data, but it doesn't help us figure out which way the causation goes. And then choice D, some of them entered and emerged from a period of depression, but they're just tracking whether there was depression or not. So even if they came in or out of it, if you have more depression versus less depression, that's still meaningful data. Like, I mean, in other words, choice D doesn't mean that this is any less meaningful of a statistic. The incidence of depression is still a very meaningful thing. I mean, imagine something else besides, again, make analogies if you have to. Like, let's say that you're tracking whether people are in pain because of some medicine they have to take. Even if people go in and out of pain, if you have a lot more people in pain who are taking the drug, that still means something, even if it's intermittent, even if they occasionally go in and out of being in pain. And there's a lot more of them in pain at any given moment. That's probably a thing. And then alcohol is irrelevant, so we don't care. I mean, the passage is about smoking, not about drinking. So there you go. That is the thing. A couple of you guys have text in your text box. We got to wrap up here pretty soon, so if you have questions, try to make them quick. Thank you for attending. As always. All right. Cool. So I'm going to turn off the recording here in just a second. If you have questions, feel free real quickly about these questions and so on. 4 more years. It's like I'm a presidential candidate. Recordings, I think they post them early the following week, so I want to say Monday or Tuesday of next week. That's just a guess. Don't quote me on that, but it's whenever the tech people get it up. I think they usually manage to post it in the next few days. Thanks, guys. I'm going to kill the recording at this point. Good night and good luck.